He thought it was his big break. Instead, he was trapped. Now, he's revealing the dark truth behind P. Diddy's record label control. He walked into the courtroom with heavy steps, his eyes reflecting years of pain and determination. The room fell silent, not from respect, but from the weight of what was about to be said. Everyone waited to hear the truth behind the glitz and glamour. Across from him sat Sean P. Diddy Combs, calm and composed, wearing a sharp navy suit. The young artist took a deep breath, hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the witness stand. "They promised me freedom, success, a chance to shine," he began, voice steady but filled with emotion. "But what I got was a trap." He paused, eyes locking onto Diddy's unreadable face. "The contract I signed wasn't a deal. It was a cage. The fine print was filled with impossible demands, and I was too young, too naive to see the chains they put on me." The gallery shifted. Some whispered. Others stared in shock. He swallowed hard and continued, "No days off. No personal space. My life was controlled down to the smallest detail. Phones were monitored. I wasn't allowed to see my family or friends. It wasn't about music anymore. It was about control." He clenched his fists, trying to hold back the flood of memories. "And when I tried to leave, the threats began. Calls in the dead of night, shadows following me. I was terrified, but I knew I couldn't stay silent." The room held its breath as the young man spoke, the first step in breaking free from a system built on fear and silence. The music industry often feels like a golden dream, a glittering stage where talent can shine and dreams come true. For Marcus Rivers, it was no different. Raised in a small town, with a voice that could move mountains and lyrics that poured from the heart, Marcus was sure he was destined for greatness. His mother, working 2 jobs, saved every penny to send him to vocal lessons, believing in her son's future. When Marcus got the call that changed his life, a private invitation to join a showcase hosted by Sean P. Diddy Combs himself, he thought his prayers had been answered. It was a chance to finally escape the shadows of obscurity, a ticket to stardom. The invitation promised exposure, connections, and a path to a record deal. Marcus saw the opportunity as the breakthrough he'd been working for. Landing in Los Angeles, Marcus was swept into a world that glittered with luxury. The mansion was more palace than home, with marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, staff in tailored suits, and an energy charged with promise. For Marcus, the party was the beginning of everything. Soon, a glossy contract was presented. The words flowed smoothly across the page, full of opportunities and rewards. Marcus, young and eager, barely glanced at the fine print. The contract promised him the world: album releases, tours, music videos, and a team dedicated to making him a star. It was everything he dreamed of. But beneath the shine lurked chains. The contract's fine print was dense, full of clauses that handed control over every aspect of Marcus's career and life to the label. It included binding commitments for years, severe penalties for breach, and clauses that stripped him of control over his own music and image. Every decision, every public appearance, every word was to be approved. Marcus didn't fully grasp what he had signed. The label framed it as standard practice, assuring him it was for his own good. They said the strict control was necessary to shape him into a star, to protect his brand, and to keep the music industry's pressures from breaking him. But as the days turned into weeks, Marcus realized the real reason was control. Total, suffocating control. The first signs appeared almost immediately. He was told when he could sleep, what he could wear, and who he could see. His phone was monitored, and all communications were filtered through the label's PR team. Missed meetings or disagreements were met with warnings, threats of suspension, or worse. One night, Marcus tried to call his mother, just to hear a familiar voice. The call was cut off abruptly. A manager appeared minutes later, cold and firm. No personal calls during business hours. If this happens again, there will be consequences. As the pressure mounted, Marcus found himself isolated. Friends stopped calling, unsure if it was the label's doing or his own silence. Family visits were rare and heavily supervised. He felt like a prisoner, even in a mansion that sparkled with riches. Yet, many around him saw only the success, the rising star, the polished performer. Few knew the cost. Despite his growing unease, Marcus tried to focus on his music. He poured his pain and frustration into his songs, hoping to connect with fans and find freedom in creation. But every lyric was scrutinized. The label demanded changes to make his music marketable. They wanted control over his voice, not just on stage, but in the studio. Marcus's identity began to blur under the label's demands. The vibrant young artist was replaced by a product, carefully crafted and controlled. He was no longer the master of his own art. The trap was closing. When Marcus finally voiced his concerns, he was met with cold indifference and veiled threats. Attempts to renegotiate the contract were stonewalled. His manager warned him that breaking free could ruin his career, or worse. But Marcus couldn't stay silent any longer. He began documenting everything: emails, phone calls, meetings. He reached out to trusted friends and legal advisors. The more he dug, the more he saw a system designed to keep artists like him under tight control, bound by fear and legal chains. Despite the fear, Marcus resolved to fight, to expose the dark underbelly of an industry that traded dreams for control. But he knew the fight would be dangerous. The higher he aimed to rise, the more resistance he would face. And he wasn't the first to try. Marcus's life under the label soon transformed from dream to nightmare. The golden cage that promised opportunity revealed itself as a prison where every detail of his existence was controlled, dictated, and monitored. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with no respite. Marcus was told his schedule, his diet, even who he was allowed to talk to. Mornings began before sunrise with vocal training, followed by endless rehearsals and photo shoots that left him exhausted. There was no time to rest, no breaks, no weekends off. Any suggestion of fatigue or complaint was met with sharp reprimands. Privacy became a distant memory. Security staff shadowed his every move, tracking him wherever he went. His phone was confiscated during the day, only returned at night, but even then, calls and messages were filtered through handlers. Texts from family were sometimes blocked or delayed. He was forbidden from seeing old friends, and visits from family were rare, tightly controlled, and often supervised by label representatives. The sense of isolation grew, feeding a deep loneliness that gnawed at his spirit. The label's grip extended into his personal relationships. Dating was off limits. The label decided who he could be seen with and when. Rumors were crafted and disseminated by PR to control his public image. If Marcus ever stepped out of line, the consequences were swift and harsh. Career opportunities were withdrawn, and threats lurked in the shadows. Behind the scenes, whispers circulated about artists who tried to resist or escape the label's control. Some were blacklisted. Others faced mysterious accidents or legal troubles that effectively ended their careers. The culture of fear was palpable. Marcus witnessed these stories firsthand. Colleagues vanished without explanation. Some were rumored to be under intense pressure, or even coerced into silence. No one talked openly about it. Fear kept them locked in compliance. Despite the oppression, Marcus tried to hold on to his music. He poured his pain into his lyrics, hoping to break free from the control. But even his creativity was stifled. The label's executives dictated what he could write, what beats he could use, and how his voice should sound. Artistic freedom was a myth. The studio sessions became battlegrounds. Producers would reject his ideas. Managers would insist on changes to appeal to market trends, and executives would cut tracks they deemed too risky. Marcus felt like a puppet, his strings pulled by unseen hands. Every day, he felt himself fading, his identity, his dreams, his voice swallowed by the machinery of the label. Then came the surveillance. Cameras were installed in his dressing room and studio spaces, allegedly for security. But Marcus knew better. Private conversations were recorded, every interaction scrutinized. Paranoia seeped in. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his closest allies. Staff were known to report any sign of dissent back to the label's higher-ups. Whispers of loyalty were really threats cloaked in friendship. His mental health suffered. Anxiety, depression, sleepless nights. But admitting to struggles was dangerous. It could be used as leverage or as a reason to cut ties. One night, Marcus received a phone call that chilled him to the bone. A voice on the other end warned him to stop asking questions and remember where your paycheck comes from. It was the kind of threat that wasn't just about money. It was about survival. He realized then that leaving wouldn't be as simple as handing in a resignation. The label wasn't just a company. It was a fortress. And Marcus was trapped inside. Yet, despite everything, a spark remained. A fierce determination that he would find a way out. For himself. For others trapped in the same prison. But first, he had to survive the storm. The weight of control grew heavier with every passing day, suffocating Marcus's spirit. Despite the risks, the desire to break free became overwhelming. The cage, once disguised by promises and glamour, was now a prison he couldn't ignore. One evening, after a grueling day of rehearsals and meetings that left him drained both physically and mentally, Marcus sat alone in his small, monitored room, the walls closing in like a tightening noose. He stared at the contract that had been forced upon him, the endless clauses that tied him up like a prisoner, contracts that stole his freedom, his identity, and even his voice. The glittering promises now felt like cruel lies. He made a decision. He would try to leave. Not just walk away physically, but legally sever ties, reclaim his life and his art. But leaving the label wasn't as simple as walking out the door. The contract was a fortress built to trap him. Every clause seemed designed to punish departure. The penalties were severe. Millions in fines, lawsuits that could drag on for years, blacklisting from the industry, a network that could destroy his reputation and career overnight. With cautious hope, Marcus reached out to a lawyer he had secretly trusted, a legal expert specializing in entertainment law and artist rights. He explained his situation, and the lawyer didn't sugarcoat the truth. This won't be easy. You'll face pushback, intimidation, maybe worse. But it's not impossible. You have to be smart and prepared. Armed with legal advice, Marcus began to gather evidence. Emails showing demands for impossible workloads, messages that contained veiled threats, recordings of phone calls where managers belittled and controlled him. Every document was a weapon, but also a risk. If discovered prematurely, it could provoke retaliation. Marcus confided in a small circle of trusted friends and industry insiders, carefully preparing for what he knew would be a long, dangerous fight. But word spread faster than expected. The label's reach was wide, and their tactics ruthless. Threats began to arrive, first subtle and then more direct. Late-night phone calls filled with heavy breathing and silence, mysterious, unmarked cars parked outside his home at odd hours, and emails warning him to think carefully before making any moves. Marcus tried to dismiss them as intimidation tactics, focusing on the end goal. But the threats escalated quickly. One night, he found his car vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed, the hood scratched with ominous words. His sanctuary was violated again at the studio, where his personal belongings had been rummaged through and rearranged, a stark message that no place was safe. Even those closest to him began to drift away, scared of being caught in the crossfire. Some received direct calls from the label's representatives, urging loyalty and silence, warning them of the consequences of association. The isolation was brutal, but Marcus's fear went beyond career damage. It was about his safety. One evening, as he left a late-night recording session, a shadowy figure approached him in the parking lot. The man's voice was low and threatening. "You're playing a dangerous game, Marcus. Back off, or things will get worse. For you and anyone close." The encounter rattled Marcus deeply, but it also steeled his resolve. He refused to back down. Taking a bold step, Marcus filed a formal complaint with a musicians' rights organization detailing the abuses he endured. This public action triggered a swift response. The label fired back with legal notices accusing Marcus of breach of contract, defamation, and attempted sabotage. The fight was no longer behind closed doors. It was public. Media outlets picked up the story, spinning narratives from various angles. Some portrayed Marcus as a disgruntled artist lashing out. Others hailed him as a brave whistleblower, challenging a corrupt system. In courtrooms and press conferences, the label's attorneys painted a picture of loyalty, success, and opportunity, dismissing Marcus's claims as exaggerations or fabrications. But Marcus's mounting evidence told a different story. Emails, testimonies from other artists, recorded threats, and the psychological toll painted a grim reality few had dared to reveal. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus remained a vocal advocate for change. His courage inspired other artists, who began sharing their own stories of manipulation and control. The music industry's dark underbelly was beginning to surface, but the personal cost for Marcus was immense. Friends were lost, trust shattered, relationships strained beyond repair. The constant fear of retaliation hung over every moment of his life. Still, he held on to a fierce hope that justice would prevail, that his story would spark change, and that no one else would endure the same nightmare. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Marcus prepared to take the stand. The months of pressure, threats, and isolation had culminated in this moment. A moment to tell his truth and fight back against the system that had controlled him for so long. As he walked up to the witness box, his heart pounded, but his resolve was unshakable. He looked out at the jury, the judge, the lawyers, and finally locked eyes with Sean P. Diddy Combs, who sat at the defendant's table with a calm, unreadable expression. "I'm not here for revenge," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'm here to expose the truth." He told the court about the contract he had signed, a contract that was less an agreement and more a chain. The impossible demands, the control over his music, his time, and even his personal life. He described the relentless surveillance, the monitored calls, the isolation from loved ones. The jury listened intently as Marcus recounted the endless rehearsals, the sleepless nights, the pressure to conform to an image that wasn't his own. He spoke of the threats, the vandalized property, and the shadowy figures warning him to stay silent. His testimony was raw and emotional. He spoke of lost friendships, broken dreams, and the fear that had haunted him every day. Then came the damning evidence, the emails, the recordings, the messages that showed a pattern of intimidation and control. The prosecution presented them clearly, piece by piece, building a case that no one could ignore. The defense tried to undermine Marcus's credibility, painting him as unstable, desperate, or bitter. They questioned his motives and his character, trying to sow doubt in the jury's mind. But Marcus remained composed. He answered every question with honesty, never wavering. His story was backed by facts, and his courage shone through. Other witnesses came forward, former artists who shared similar experiences, a former manager who spoke of the label's ruthless tactics, and even a psychologist who testified about the psychological abuse Marcus and others endured. Each testimony added weight to the growing case against the label. Outside the courtroom, The media frenzy intensified. Hashtags like Number Free the Artists and Number Justice for Marcus trended worldwide. Supporters gathered, demanding change in an industry that had long operated in shadows. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The judge reminded everyone of the gravity of the proceedings. As the trial neared its conclusion, Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. He had laid his soul bare, risking everything to speak the truth. The jury deliberated for hours. When they finally returned, the courtroom held its breath. The foreperson stood and read the verdict. Guilty on charges of coercion, psychological abuse, and breach of contract. A collective gasp filled the room. Diddy's composed facade faltered, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a triumph of truth over fear. As he left the courtroom, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. When asked if he had anything to say, Marcus looked directly into the lens and said, "This isn't just my story. It's the story of so many trapped in silence. We deserve to be free." Marcus stepped out of the courtroom, the weight of the verdict settling deep within him. Guilty. The word was simple but powerful, a confirmation that his years of fear, silence, and sacrifice had not been in vain. For the first time, the invisible chains that had held him captive began to break. Outside, reporters and cameras swarmed like a storm. Flashbulbs lit up the steps as Marcus stood before the crowd. When asked for a statement, he lifted his head high and spoke with steady resolve. "This victory isn't just mine," he said. "It belongs to everyone who's ever been silenced, controlled, or forced into hiding. For too long, the music industry has been a place of fear and manipulation, not creativity and freedom. Today, that begins to change." His words rippled across social media and news outlets, igniting a spark among artists and fans alike. Support poured in from all corners, many sharing their own stories of struggles behind the scenes. Marcus had become more than a name. He was a symbol of courage and change. Walking into the sunlight, he finally felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The fight was far from over. There were still walls to tear down and voices to be heard. But justice had taken a stand, and that was a start. Behind the glitz, behind the fame, the truth had finally been told. And that truth would no longer be buried in silence.